Let's begin by reciting a Fatiha for all of the Shuhada, for all of the rightful scholars that have passed away, for all of the marhumeen of everyone in this gathering, and for all those who do not have anyone to recite a Fatiha for them. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. For the hastening of the reappearance of our beloved Imam, please recite aloud salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So that we may be among his true companions, his true followers, and his true lovers, please recite the second one louder.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil.
And as an invitation to the beloved Imam of our time to this gathering and to the Shuhada, please recite the third one the loudest.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا شفيع ذنوبنا عبد القاسم المصطفى محمد
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil.
وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين المنتجبين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفداء. قال سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد رسلنا بالبينات وأنزلنا معهم الكتاب والميزان ليقوم الناس بالقسط وأنزلنا الحديد فيه بأس شديد. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Please recite another loud salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil.
In this series of talks that we have gained the tawfiq to be a part of, we have been trying to understand what is this religion that not only is alive but also gives life. To do that, what we want to do is we want to understand the concepts related to this religion with the correct understanding, and then see how that correct understanding actually affects our day-to-day life. How those correct understandings give life to our words, actions, and decisions. Yesterday we had a look at Tawheed. And if you remember at the beginning of the discussion, I asked the question, how would you translate Tawheed? How do we normally translate Tawheed? And a couple of suggestions were oneness of Allah or monotheism, for example. And then I left you at a bit of a cliffhanger and decided not to tell you what the correct translation of Tawheed would be. And I was hoping that by the end of the talk, you would have a pretty reasonable idea. But just for the sake of those who are not there, the correct translation of the word Tawheed is not oneness of God. It is not monotheism. It is to make something one. It is to make something one. Another word that we're familiar with, which is in the same form in Arabic, is ta'aleem. Ta'aleem, right? So it comes from the root, knowledge, ilm. When you put it in that specific form, ta'aleem, it means to teach. Same thing with Tawheed, right? Tawheed is not oneness, it is to make something one. The summary of everything that was said yesterday is what? Tawheed is not something you think, Tawheed is something you do. It's an action. That is the summary of everything that we had mentioned yesterday.
MashaAllah.
What did we say Tawheed is? La ilaha illallah. It is not La ilah and it is not illallah. Right? We said it's both. Both. The negation of the non-divine and going towards the divine together make Tawheed. You can speak about Allah all day. And even the heads of the Quraysh will not be upset. Remember what they said. You can speak about your God as long as you can let us speak about ours. The negation of the non-divine is as important as going towards the divine. And we said in certain spiritual matters, it may even be that the negation is more important than the journey. Why? Because until you get rid of the impurities, how can you put in that pure light in this container that's our heart? 100%. Karbala, the tragedy of Karbala, the event of Ashura would not have taken place if Tawheed was understood in this correct manner. No doubt about that. And again, just to remind you, I may not have made this connection yesterday, but just to remind you specifically that narration from our dear beloved Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
When he was asked, how were the Banu Umayyah able to trample upon your rights? What did he say? He said, because they allowed people to speak about Iman, but they did not allow people to speak about shirk. So when shirk was imposed upon them, they had no clue. That's how important the negation of the non-divine was. So Tawheed is not something you think, it's not something you believe. Tawheed is something that you have to do. Please recite a salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So taking on board that correct definition of Tawheed, and also looking at plenty of examples of what that means for our day-to-day lives now, right? When we make our words, actions and decisions, where do we see Tawheed? Do we see the negation of the non-divine and going towards the divine? Or is Tawheed still just trying to prove the existence of God and that's it? Right? It's something we need to think about. We gave different examples. I think the general principle was understood that everything belongs to Him, does not belong to anyone else, including you. Therefore, your money, your possessions, your children, even your life is His, and no other supposed God, including this nafs of yours, has a right to tell you what to do with these things that in reality belong to God. Practically, that means no matter what you want to do in life, what should you be looking at? What does God want me to do? That's a very practical reality of understanding what Tawheed is properly. Right? Today we want to speak about Nabuwah. Again, there are different ways to approach this discussion. We want to approach it in a manner that has an effect on our lives. We gave that example yesterday. I don't want to repeat myself. Divine prophets, one of the students of Allama Tabatabai, he says this. The divine prophets are the embodied manifestation of Tawheed. They are the reality of Tawheed and its concrete example. In the words of Allama Tabatabai, the existence of the divine prophets is the form of Tawheed in action. We mentioned this in passing yesterday, that as soon as the final messenger said La ilaha illallah, as soon as that flag was raised, it had two immediate effects on its surroundings. What were they? Number one, all those non-divine entities who were claiming to be gods, who were happy being worshipped, began to worry. And all those who were the oppressed and the downtrodden and were being forced to worship them, they saw hope. Practically, what does that mean for us? If we are muwahhid, थोड़े से सख्त जुमले. If we are muwahhid, then our presence should have the exact same effect on our surroundings. Our presence should be a source of worry for the false idols, and our presence should be a source of hope for the downtrodden and the oppressed. That is what being a muwahhid is. If that is not the effect that you're having, you, or I should say we, have a tawheed that is as dead as that body we spoke about yesterday, that has no effect on its surroundings. Something to keep into consideration. He continues, when Musa, with only a sheepskin cloak on his back and a wooden staff in hand, entered the opulent palace of Fir'aun and said, abandon tyranny and oppression, and believe so your kingdom may endure. This was that same Tawheedi spirit in the divine Wali's soul, unafraid of the grandeur of weapons and bombs or any military or media power, and fearing none besides Allah. The practical effect of Tawheed on the psychology of a person.
Subhanallah.
Again, if you want to see whether you are a muwahhid or not, this should happen. Nabuwa is seeing how that message is manifested in this world, in this life. Every moment of Sayyid al-Shuhada's movement was Tawheed. Every moment, every step he took, every word he said was the negation of even recognizing the authority of the non-divine. And he rose so he could take people towards the establishment of a divine system. That is why we say Sayyid al-Shuhada and Zawat al-Waritha is the inheritor of the prophets. What is this inheritance we are talking about? It's Tawheed. It's Tawheed. The beautiful lines of poetry which every Shia knows, especially from the Desi background, even though technically it's Farsi poetry. But after hearing the talk yesterday of Tawheed, now understand these words. By Allah, until I understood Tawheed in this manner, I just thought these were beautiful lines of poetry that we just say Subhanallah wa to. But the depth, Badshah asked Hussein, what is the religion that Allah and the Prophet were calling you towards? A religion that gives life, right? A religion in which Tawheed is alive in this manner. That is what Sayyid al-Shuhada was representing. Deen asked Hussein. And that is exactly the religion he was protecting. Deen Pana hast Hussein. Sardad nadad dast dar daste Yazid. He gave his head, but he refused to give his hands to Yazid. This last makes sense now. See the link between Tawheed and this prophetic movement, which then manifested itself in Karbala. Everything he did was Tawheed. The mission of the prophets could not be clearer. Subhanallah, there is a reason. We're going to touch upon why we did not realize that actually, yes, this is the mission of the Prophet. There's a bit of repetition in this, but unfortunately it's required. Surah A'raf, verse number 59. لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا نُوحًا إِلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ فَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. Certainly we sent Nuh to his people. He said, O my people, worship Allah. You have no other God besides Him. What's the mission of Nuh? Tawheed. Next verse. Surah, verse number 65. وَإِلَىٰ عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. And to the people of Ad we sent Hud, their brother. He said, O my people, worship Allah, you have no other God besides Him. What's the mission of Hud? Tawheed. Surah A'raf, verse number 73. وَإِلَى ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. And to the people of Thamud, we sent Salih, their brother. He said, O my people, worship Allah, you have no other God besides Him. What was his mission? Tawheed. Surah A'raf, verse number 85. وَإِلَى مَدْيَنَ أَخَاهُمْ شُعَيْبًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. And to the people of Madian we sent Shu'aib, their brother. He said, O my people, worship Allah, you have no other God besides Him. What was the mission of Shu'aib? Tawheed. And yet we think, considering it's wajib to believe in all of these prophets, considering the Quran has repeated what the mission of the prophets was, can you be a Muslim and live a life in which you do not see the rejection of other than Allah and going towards Allah? But again, in our words, actions and decisions we make, considering what we said yesterday, is that really what is seen? This is Nabuwah. This is the Risala of all of the prophets. To get one message to us, not even said in different ways, one message to us, and yet we can be Muslim, in which it's wajib to believe in these prophets, but our life has very little to do with the rejection of the non-divine. Now, I am stressing the rejection of the non-divine because going towards the divine, you generally see that happening. You generally see that happening. Is okay with that. That's the issue. That's the issue. Focus on Allah so much. Focus on Allah so much that you do not know me, Shaitan. You do not know my strategies. You do not know how I have made plans for you. So when I execute them, whilst praying, whilst fasting, whilst reciting the Quran, I will use you against the religion. I will use you against this Allah that you claim to be going towards. We use this example a lot. It's a good reminder for us. Nahrawan. I've mentioned this on the day of Ghadir as well. If you look at how those individuals are described who fought against Amir al-Mu'mineen, what does it say? They had marks of prostration on their forehead. Their knees were bruised because of how much prostration they would do. They would cry so much in their Salatul Layl that their beards would get soaked. They were memorizers of the Quran. Speak about Allah as much as you want. But if you are not understanding the problems, the forms, the strategies of other than Allah, then you may one day end up fighting against the same Allah you profess to worship. There may come a day when it's Ashura and you are beheading the grandson of the Prophet who gave you this message with the slogans of Takbir. That's how dangerous it is not to negate the non-divine. And that is what the Risala of the Prophet was, according to all of these verses that we have mentioned. Surah Jum'ah, verse number 2. Please recite salawat. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. It is he who sent to the people a messenger from among themselves to recite to them his signs, to purify them and to teach them the book and wisdom. What I want to focus on is this word, ba'atha, which has been translated here as sent. Like many, unfortunately, words in Arabic, it's not easy to find a translation for this, like tawheed, for example. Ba'atha, in its root meaning, means to raise something, to substantially change the state of something. That's what it means. How is it translated? Over here, that Allah sent. Sometimes it's translated as chose, right? But in its root meaning, it means to raise something. So one way you could say is that He is the one who raised the Prophet among you, right? We have a verse in the Quran, وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ وَالْإِيمَانَ لَقَدْ لَبِثْتُمْ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْبَعْثِ. But those who are given knowledge and faith will say, certainly you remain in Allah's book until the day of Ba'ath. What's Yawm al-Ba'ath a reference to? Qiyamah, right? The day of resurrection. Why is Ba'ath being used there? What's the substantial change that will happen? You will see those without life come to life, right? So a significant change. This is what it's a reference to. So when we speak about Ba'ath in relationship to the Prophet, we have Eid al-Mab'ath, for example. We call it the day of proclamation, you know, when the mission of the Prophet began, right? What are we really saying? This is the day in which a substantial change began. A change that was not there before. A substantial change began. And there are two changes that are spoken of over here. One is the internal change in the Prophet. The Prophet went from a certain level to another level which was so significant that even for the Prophet it was like going from death to life. Right? Now we will never understand what that is, because even in that previous state, the Prophet is so far from us, we won't understand that, let alone what that change actually means. It's like trying to understand the difference between the levels of the companions, that Salman is on level 10 and Ammar is on level 9. And our teacher said that's like us standing here on the ground and looking up at the stars and trying to figure out the distance between them. How will we know from down here what the distance is between them? So this change, we can't quite comprehend exactly what level he was before or what level he became after. But the other change that is being spoken about here, the substantial change, is the change that happened outside, external, the change that the Prophet was going to bring about. Why is it important to highlight that the Prophet was there to bring about substantial change? Because we have begun to understand that the prophets only came about to make superficial changes. That's how we have understood it. And as I mentioned, there's a reason why. Sayyid al-Qaid says over here, bear with me, some people have misunderstood who the prophets were. They think he's an advisor who enters a city and has a few discussions with the people about what is religion, what is not religion. Or he tells them some rulings regarding ahkam, or he's a very good speaker and he gives a few speeches and tries to educate them in that manner. On one hand, and stays in the spiritual form. And this individual, he gets a house in the corner of the society and sits there whilst people come one group at a time to gain knowledge from them. They imagine that Janab Musa or Janab Ibrahim had a house or an office which had specific hours and specific times were allotted to specific segments of society. And when people would come, they would give them nasiha. And then we say those people who listen to these individuals were good people and they are among the faithful. And those people who did not listen to them, they are the disbelievers. This is the image that we've created about who the prophets were. Does that sound like individuals creating substantial change in society? Ba'atha means substantial change. That does not sound like individuals who are making a substantial change. What is substantial change? An example is given. What do we think? There's a building. We need to make some changes. So what do? We put a new coat of paint. Right? We change some of the lights, for example. We change the carpet. Building is still the same building. Those changes that we make, we think we've done something. Right? That's not a substantial change. Substantial change is this. There is a sports hall, right? Imagine a sports hall. A sports hall has very specific foundations. Why? Because the foundations don't need to carry a lot of weight. It's literally 4 walls and a ceiling. Look at another building. It's a residential complex. The foundations are a lot deeper in the ground. They're a lot more substantial. Why? Because it needs to take on that weight. Substantial change, what we're talking about, is we need to change the sports hall into a residential complex. Now you come, what do? I want this sports hall to be a residential complex, so I'm going to paint it. I'm going to change its lights. I'm going to change the surface. Does it become a residential complex? No. The prophets came to non-divine societies, the foundations of which were men, the creations of Allah. Upon those foundations, can you put the structure of a divine society? Impossible. Impossible. You may try to change a few things here and there, but then you begin to realize that, hang on a second, if I keep making these superficial changes, these foundations can't bear the load. This whole thing is going to collapse. So what did the prophets do? They dug up the foundations. And they looked to change the foundations so that you can put this divine structure on this. That's what the prophets came to do. That substantial change. You demolish the building regardless of whether there's people inside it or not. Then you dig up the foundations and then you put new foundations in, and then on the bodies of the people that have been destroyed as a result of your demolition, you build this new structure. That's not what happens. What did the prophets do? Something much more difficult. I only understood this example when I saw it with my own eyes in Qom. So there was a building next to our madrasa, and they wanted an extension done. Now, to get this extension, they wanted to go from a 2-story building to a 4-story building. To do this, the council said to them that the foundations are not strong enough. You need to put in new foundations. So I was talking to the person who owns the building, and I was confused. I was thinking, okay, does that mean you have to get rid of the whole building now? And he said, no, watch. He said watch because at that time my Farsi wasn't great, and I think he got tired of trying to explain it to me. He says, look, come and watch. I was like, okay. So I came. What did they do? There was an empty piece of land next to this building. They dug it up, and then they dug up the foundations of that building, but only slightly. And then they stuck a very heavy iron rod to hold it stable, and then they dug some more of the foundations, and they put another rod, and so on and so forth. Right? That is much more difficult than just bulldozing the whole place down. And why? Because people are still living there. People still don't quite understand what you're trying to do. If you try to bulldoze that house, not only will you lose them, people will think there's something wrong with you. And they'll move away from the mission that you're trying to complete. What did the prophets do? The prophets didn't come and say, whatever culture exists, whatever actions exist, whatever it will be completely destroyed, and we have these new rules now. None of the prophets did that. None of them. Very small example, we've all heard of this, I'll just mention it. Look at how alcohol was banned in stages in the society. Why? Why would the Prophet try to enforce something in a manner that could lead to the divine society never being established? Right? So what do you have to do? Okay, you try and change the hearts and minds of people. When the hearts and minds are ready, okay, you go stage 1. Then you change more hearts and minds, you go stage 2, and so on and so forth. Over here you find two extremes. You have those who bulldoze the building, and then you have those who say, no, the foundations aren't ready, so they end up doing nothing. And while saying that they want a divine society, while saying that they want a residential complex instead of this sports hall, what do they spend their whole lives doing? Just painting the walls. Just changing the lights. They do absolutely nothing to move towards the objective, the two extremes. Unfortunately, you see this in Western communities. You really do. I've had the opportunity to visit more than 60 communities in the UK. That is not speaking wise, by the way. I don't speak. I try and avoid it as much as I can. But just for the sake of this research, we had a questionnaire. We went to these centers. We sat down with them. We just tried to understand like what's happening. The situation is scary. The situation is very scary. If you do not know Tawheed, if you do not understand why the prophets came, then what exactly are you trying to do in the name of Tawheed and Nabuwah? If we say that the prophets came to bring about substantial change, what does that mean? What are we saying? As those who believe in Nabuwah, we also have the same responsibility. Otherwise, pure lip service. The same position the Pope holds for Catholics, the same position the Prophet holds for many Muslims. Lip service. Please pray for us. Tawassul. Rather than the Prophet is saying, look, you will get this, don't worry. But that's not what I came to give you. That's a side effect. What I came to give you is these guidelines. Look how I spent my whole existence, sacrificing every moment. Not just me, the ones I love the most, including my own daughter, will be sacrificed. Why? So you keep painting this house? Also, you move and bring about substantial change. Understanding Nabuwah correctly means you become one who brings about substantial change as well. Why? Because now you understand that's what the prophets came to do. I am sure all of the prophets we mentioned in the verses, I am sure they were sent with other beliefs and other ahkam and so on and so forth. With their own shariahs, right? But what is the thing that Allah mentions over and over again? The negation of the non-divine and going towards the divine. Every moment of ours should be spent in the pursuit of that. Let me put it another way. Sayyid al-Shuhada with all of his greatness. Sayyid al-Shuhada with all of his greatness. Everything he had to go through. Every oppression that was dealt upon him was for what? Because he was trying to bring about this substantial change. Are our lives more valuable than the life of Sayyid al-Shuhada, that he can spend it in the pursuit of this goal, but no, I need to protect this precious life that I have. If you understood who the prophets were, then when you say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, please just say salawat. You will realize that this is not just lip service. There's other stuff that I wanted to mention today, but I will leave it for now. In this verse that we mentioned, from Surah Jum'ah, verse number 2, there are some tasks that are mentioned that the Prophet is to do. To recite to them his signs, to purify them, and to teach them the book and wisdom. I will very quickly zoom in on tazkiyah. Mention of tazkiyah, he's come to purify. What is tazkiyah? Very simply, it's a beautiful example that Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi gives. He says tazkiyah is what a gardener does to the plant. He makes sure that nothing that can harm the plant comes close to it and gives it whatever can strengthen it. That's tazkiyah. Get rid of all of your vices, get rid of all of those things that can stop your growth, and give yourself that which allows you to grow. That is what tazkiyah is. I'm sure you all have heard of Agha Panahiyan, right? With those short clips that are subtitled. He has a very interesting discussion on tazkiyah. He says, when I look at tazkiyah, I first see this as a socio-political term, and then I see it as a spiritual term. Why? Because when you look at the life of the Prophet, was he trying to create a system which purifies people, or was he just busy working with individuals on their internal spiritual growth? Tazkiyah is as much as a socio-political term as it is a spiritual term. Yes, it's something we have to do as individuals, but even when you saw the Prophet work on individuals for tazkiyah, why? So that they can become the pillars upon which the system of tazkiyah would rest. Upon which the system of tazkiyah would rest. Something to take into account for those who are in places of responsibilities of different centers. Including this center, including any other center. Very important point for fathers of families as well, as leaders of the family. Tazkiyah can only happen externally if you do it internally. As an organizer of a Majlis, you can have 365 days worth of lectures on tazkiyah, but if you are not working on tazkiyah yourself, you will never be able to create a system for the community where they can purify themselves as well. It is impossible. It is impossible. Again, you can see extremes there. You work on the individual so much, you forget the society. You work on the society so much, you forget the individual. Both have to happen. Right? Please recite salawat. Again, quoting Sayyid al-Qaid, so he's like, okay, so who are the prophets? This is a person who enters society restless with a burning coal in their hearts. Remember what we said yesterday. For those who understand primarily as Muslims, as muwahhids, we negate the non-divine and go to the divine. If we are having to participate in non-divine systems, there's going to be a restlessness within us. If we recognize that's our primary position. This is a person who enters society restless with a burning coal in their hearts. They come in and see what is not in its correct position and put in the necessary efforts to correct it. A skilled architect or engineer walks into a society, looks at the buildings around him, and he knows straight away what is built and what isn't, what needs to be removed and what needs to be changed. A prophet comes in and he sees structures around him and busies himself in fixing those. Why? Because he needs to make those foundations so then he can change the society as well. The true miracle of the Prophet was not the splitting of the moon or the Quran. Sayyid al-Qaid says the true miracle of the Prophet was Abu Dhar. Why? He says Abu Dhar is described like this. He is a person who not only does not understand things, but he has no inclination to even learn. Nothing of humanity seemed to exist in him. There were no signs in him being attracted towards any virtues or any goodness. He was a wild man who walked around without shoes, known to be dirty and always angry. And he would just walk around the city. Can you imagine this is the description of Abu Dhar? The miracle of the Prophet was taking someone like that and turning them into the honor of humanity. Right? That's what the Prophet came to do. And he is the pillar upon which we all now can rest. But why do we get it wrong? Why did we misunderstand who the prophets were? This is so important. Inshallah, in the time that I have, I'll be able to get this message across to you. Very scary point, but very important. I'm sure you've all heard the saying, the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. Yeah? You've all heard this, right? So even though the actual narration itself, there are question marks about it, but when you generally see the collection of narrations regarding the prophets and regarding the scholars, you understand this to be a correct statement. Now the problem is when you see a statement like this, what are you going to do? I want to understand who the prophets were. So I'm going to look at the scholars that are around. Whatever these scholars are doing is equivalent to the prophets. Why? Because they are the inheritors of the prophet. So what happens? We see a person who has all the descriptions we mentioned before. And what do we say? This is what the prophets must have been like. Of course, some of us are very fortunate to have experienced proper scholars. Proper scholars. We mentioned Imam Khomeini, we mentioned Shaheed Muttahiri, Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, Shaheed Baqir al-Sadr. Shaheed Baqir al-Sadr, in his words, with his blood, in the most difficult of circumstances, he showed us who the prophets were. He showed us who the prophets were. As a subcontinental community, Shaheed Arif Hussaini showed us who the prophets were. Can you imagine Shaheed Arif in Pakistan sitting down and being like the description that we mentioned, just mentioning some ahkam here and there, just giving some advice here and there, and that's it. I'm not even sure he sat down. That's who Shaheed Arif was. It's so important, especially for our youth. Don't look at necessarily the people who sit on this chair or on the member that used to be here, right? Understand the sacrifices of the rightful scholars At the beginning, what do I always say? I always say recite the Fatiha for the rightful scholars. Why? Because it's through them we understand who the prophets actually were and what our responsibilities actually are.
बुलंदी दर्जात शीद अल्लामा आरिफ हुसैनी इमाम खुमैनी बाबा दे बुलंद सलावत अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि राय सेहत इस्लाम के रहबर मुअज्जम आयतुल्लाह खामनाई सलावत अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि।
If you want to see an inheritor of the Prophet, look at the way Imam Khomeini shook the oppressors and the idols of the world. Look at the way the oppressed finally felt that they have someone. Look at those who had their tarbiyah done by the khat of Imam Khomeini. That right now when the whole world is turning a blind eye, the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt on this khat are the ones who are a thorn in the side of the oppressors. And the oppressed have no one to turn to apart from these individuals who have understood what Nabuwa was, who found the rightful scholars. There's a sermon that Sayyid al-Shuhada gave in Mina. This was near the end of the time of Muawiyah. The situation was difficult. Sayyid al-Shuhada had begun to feel that loneliness which was to culminate on the day of Ashura. He could see around him that people had stopped fulfilling their responsibilities. He could see this. And he addressed the awam in one way, he addressed the khawas in one way. Within the khawas, he addressed the political heads in one way, he addressed the scholars in another way. I won't have time to open this up too much. However, the words speak for themselves. The desperation that Sayyid al-Shuhada had to reach to then say these words. These are parts of the sermon. If anyone wants to look it up, it's a sermon that Sayyid al-Shuhada gave in Mina. One of the reasons why people may not see this is because they see what scholars are doing around them. Which scholars existed at that time? And then what did the people do? They felt, okay, well, then this is what we need to do. O scholars who are respected and admired for your knowledge, people praise you because of your piety, the good advice you give, and the guidance you offer. It is because of God that people honor you and stand in awe of you. Even powerful people fear you and feel obliged to stand up when you enter. Those who are not under your authority still see themselves as your followers, and they willingly give you favors they will not even give themselves. So the awam, they respect you as scholars. They may not eat themselves just to make sure that you are comfortable and you get something to eat. The Imam continues, have you not earned all these forms of respect and prestige because of their hopes that you will implement God's laws, even though in most instances you have failed to do so? You have failed to enforce most of the rights you were entrusted to protect. You have neglected the rights of the oppressed and the lowly, squandered the rights of the weak and the powerless, but pursued persistently what you regard as your own personal rights. Subhanallah. You know, we have a sister, a Shia sister, who for months has been in prison in the UK. For months she's been in prison in the UK. And she was treated horribly at the beginning. Her name Fatima Zainab. Fatima Zainab. Our heart should burn to know that someone of that name is in prison. Why? Because she took the steps to stand up against the oppressors. She protested. The details of what they were involved in, you can go and find out yourself. Where were the scholars? Again, not all of them. There are some. Where were the scholars? Where are the leaders of the communities? Where are the leaders of the Hussainiyas and Imam Bargas and Masajid? Where are the leaders of the families, O fathers? But, subhanallah, when your center, when your institution, when your organization, when your family may be getting attacked, you persistently fight for your own personal right. You have not spent your money or risked your lives for the sake of the one who gave you life, nor have you fought against any group or tribe for the sake of Allah. You desire and regard it as your right from Allah that He should give you paradise, that He should give you the company of the Prophet, that He should give you security from the hellfire. You who have such expectations of God, I fear that the full weight of His wrath will descend upon you. Sayyid al-Shuhada can see the loneliness he is about to face. He is letting them know, if you do not do your duties, what will happen, and you will definitely be deserving of this punishment. For although it is by His might and glory that you have achieved high rank, you show no respect to those who truly know God. I am also worried about you for another reason. Subhanallah. You see the agreements made with God being broken and ignored, but you don't seem concerned at all. Yet when the agreements made with your ancestors are violated, even just a little, you become upset and anxious. Subhanallah. But the promises you made to the noble messenger mean nothing to you. You don't care about them at all. Everywhere, the blind, the mute, and the chronically ill have no one to protect them, and no mercy is shown to them. That sounds like a society in which Tawheed is missing. Hussein had to save this Tawheed. You do not act in a way that suits your position and duty. You also do not support those who do fulfill their role and work to uphold the status of the religious scholars. You don't do it yourself, nor do you help those who are doing it. Instead, you buy your own safety from the oppressive rulers by flattering them, trying to please them, and making compromises with them. The Muslim Ummah is drowning in the blood of infants who have been burnt alive. And you have individuals wearing the cloak of the Prophet, making agreements and sitting down with a smile on their face and handshakes with the people who have committed these crimes. Of course, Karbala will happen in such a situation. Of course, 100 more Gazas will happen. God has forbidden you from doing all these things. He has also ordered you to stop each other from doing them, but you ignore this. You do it, and you don't say anything. Let's say you don't do it, you don't say anything to those who are. The disaster that has struck you ran away in fear of being killed and clung to the short-lived. This mindset and the actions it led to, you handed over the helpless people to the oppressors. You handed them to the oppressors. Oh, leaders of communities, O fathers of families, by not standing on your principles, by compromising, by this and that, you hand over your communities into the hands of the oppressors. Imagine the situation that existed at the time that Sayyid al-Shuhada said this. He knew what was about to happen. How do you understand the true value of scholars? This. I said it in passing yesterday. Important to highlight this. So we know. How do you know if a scholar is valuable or not? You look at what stands against them. Okay? I'll give you an example. You want to understand the greatness of Ibrahim? Look at how great the fire was that Namrud had made for him. You will see the value of Ibrahim. You want to see the value of Sayyid al-Shuhada? You see that even though they are hungry and thirsty, still the enemy's numbers kept on increasing. 30,000. Why? So we could see the value of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You want to see the value of our scholars? As Sayyid Zaygam Rizvi Sahab says, on one side you have these elderly men with tasbeehs in their hands and a walking stick, and on the other side you have the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. Understand the value of these scholars by looking at what stands against them. Subhanallah. A scholar that we want to remember today, a scholar in every aspect, everything that we have said, a dear friend of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Habib ibn Mazahir, the embodiment of what it means to be a scholar. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. ایک ایسے صحابی امام کے جو بچپنے سے امام کے دوست تھے, بہت قریب تھے, مولا علی کے اصحاب سر میں سے تھے. کوئی چھوٹی بات نہیں ہے. اپنے وجود کے اندر امیر المومنین کے سر رکھ سکے. بہت عظیم شخصی. مولا حسن کے ساتھ سب سے سخت مرحلوں میں ڈٹے رہے. کوفے کے اندر جناب مسلم کے ساتھ. روایتوں میں کہ ایک دن حبیب کے پاس بنی اسد گئے. ان کو خبر ملی کہ امام حسین سے خط پہنچے, اور جب وہ پہنچے حبیب کے گھر, اندر سے رونے کی آواز آئی. رونے کی آواز کیوں نہ آئے؟ جو خط ملا تھا حبیب کو, پہلے جملے میں ایک ایسے مصیبت کا بیان کرا مولا حسین نے. کیا لکھا؟ من الغریب الی الحبیب, من الغریب الی الحبیب. بنی اسد اندر آئے اور کہتے ہیں کہ کیا ہوا؟ ہم نے سنا ہے کہ ایسا کچھ خط آئے. حبیب نے کہا جی حسین نے مجھے بلایا ہے یاری کے لیے. بنی اسد نے کہا کہ تم کیا رائے رکھتے ہو اس کے بارے میں؟ اب حبیب کس سے بھروسہ کر سکتے ہیں؟ کیا کریں حبیب؟ وہ ان سے کہتے کہ میں تو اب بوڑھا ہو گیا, میں کہاں جا کے لوں گا. ان کو تسلی ملتی ہے, وہ چلے جاتے. حبیب کی زوجہ یہ سن رہی تھی, وہ ناراض ہو. میں کہا حبیب یہ میں کیا سن رہی ہوں؟ فاطمہ کے بیٹے نے تمہیں خط لکھا اور تم نہیں جاؤ گے؟ حبیب نے کہا کہ حبیب نے سوچا کہ میں اپنی زوجہ کا امتحان لیتا ہوں. حبیب نے کہا کہ اگر میں گیا یہ گھر خراب ہوئے گا, ہماری پوری زندگی کی کمائی لوٹی جائے گی اور تم اسیر ہوگی. تیار ہو؟ زوجہ نے کہا سب فدا ہو حسین. پھر ان کی زوجہ خطاب کرتی ہیں خدا سے, کہتی ہیں اے خدا کاش میں مرد ہوتی, ابھی جا کے جنگ لڑتی. حبیب سمجھ گئے کہ ان کی زوجہ تیار ہے. حبیب باہر نکلے. عجیب منظر دیکھا حبیب نے. ساری دکانیں کوفے میں بند سوائے وہ دکانوں کے جو ہتھیار بیچ رہے تھے. ادھر تلواروں کو تیز کرا جا رہا تھا, ادھر نیزوں کو تیز کرا جا رہا تھا. حبیب دیکھتے ہیں ادھر سے مسلم آ گئے, مسلم ابن اوسجہ. مسلم سے کہتے ہیں کہ تم کہاں جا رہے ہو؟ کہا کہ میں اپنے داڑھی پہ رنگ لگانے جا رہا ہوں. حبیب ان کا ہاتھ پکڑتے, میرے ساتھ چلو. کہاں؟ میں ایک ایسی جگہ تمہیں لے کے جاؤں گا جدھر ایسا رنگ لگے گا تمہاری داڑھی میں کہ قیامت کے دن تک تمہیں کچھ نہیں کرنا پڑے گا. حسین کی طرف سے خط آئے, چلیں ان کی یاری کے لیے. حبیب نکلے. جب پہنچنے لگے خیمے حسین کے پاس, ادھر بھی عجیب کیفیت تھی. مولا حسین تھوڑی سی دوری پہ کھڑے ہوئے تھے اور کوفے کی طرف نظر تھی ان کی. پیچھے سے کوئی آیا اور کہا کہ کوفے سے اب کوئی امید نہیں ہے, کوفہ بے وفا ہو گئے. حسین نے کہا نہیں, تمہیں نہیں پتا, میرا ایک وہاں حبیب ہے جو وفادار ہے, وہ ضرور آئے گا. حبیب پہنچے. مولا حسین نے جوانوں سے کہا کہ حبیب کے استقبال کے لیے جاؤ, تو وہ گئے. خیموں میں تکبیروں کی آوازیں آئیں, تھوڑا سا شور ہوا. بی بی زینب جو خیمے کے اندر تھی وہ پوچھتی ہیں کہ کیا ہوا, تو ان کو بتایا گیا بی بی آپ کے بھائی کے دوست حبیب پہنچ گئے. بی بی زینب کہتی ہیں کہ جا کے حبیب کو میرا سلام پہنچا. جا کے حبیب تک سلام پہنچا. جیسے ہی حبیب بی بی زینب کا سلام سنتی ہیں, حبیب گھوڑے سے اپنے آپ کو زمین کربلا پہ گراتے ہیں, اپنے آپ کو تماچے مارتے ہیں, رونے لگتے ہیں اور کہتے ہیں یہ غربت کیسی آئی ہے, یہ کیسی غربت ہے خاندان رسول پہ کہ زینب جیسی علی کی بیٹی مجھ جیسے حبیب کو سلام بھیجتی ہوں. الا لعنت اللہ علی القوم الظالمین. ماتم حسین.
یا حسین